Ooh, you didn't tell me you were a brainiac.
Welcome, Brainiacs, to a very special episode of the LeatherBrainz Podcast. My name is producer Scotty, and I am here with the one and only MK of FantasyBrainz fame. So if you're one of those LeatherBrainz Brainiacs that's been around for a while, you love fantasy football, make sure you're tuning in each and every week to the FantasyBrainz Show live on X and YouTube, as well as on Spotify, where you can watch and listen. So, Kahan, you're kind of guesting here. This is an empty house for us because Slapdawg is out doing his thing. He started a business, so we'll give him a pass. He's been a little bit busy, hasn't been able to make it. Alan, on the other hand, is just out traveling the world. He's on some beach somewhere with his family, living life up. He's actually going to join us later in the show to talk a little bit of Week 8. But for now, I really appreciate you filling in because nobody wants to listen to me talk to myself for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I'm glad to be here. I love being a part of the LeatherBrainz podcast. And, we always have a good time on here. And I think, Alan really gave me this opportunity here because I think he's out there celebrating with the Chiefs. Chiefs are 7-0 and Alan's on vacation. So I guess life is just up for him at this point, man.
Well, before we get into all the meat and potatoes here, you brought him up. So let's talk about the Chiefs real quick. I didn't put him on the show notes. They beat the Raiders. Everyone kind of expected that to happen, except for maybe some Chiefs fans like myself who know that the Raiders, they always make it such a tough game. And Max Crosby is so freaking annoying, and I just hate watching him play football. But the Chiefs escaped with another win, and I don't know how they're still doing this. I feel like I don't remember what our record was through, 8 weeks last year, but I remember throughout basically the entirety of the regular season as a Chiefs fan being like, this team cannot win a Super Bowl. Like, we can't do it. Our offense is shit. It's a good thing we got Spags in the defense. But here we are, 2024, and they just keep winning. And what's your prediction? Is this something that's going to keep happening? Are we just that lucky as Chiefs fans, or is this something that when they play the Detroit Lions or someone like that in the playoffs that just looks like an absolute juggernaut, is this all going to fall apart for me?
I feel like at the end of the day, as long as they always have Mahomes, Reed, and Spagnuolo, they can win any game. It's just like when you have such a great scheme on both sides of the ball and you have the perfect guy to run it, there's not much you can do. I mean, you got Rashee Rice hurt. You got Marquise Brown hurt. Hopkins just comes in for the trade. They don't have many weapons. Pacheco got hurt as well, but this team is just so good. And being 7-0 when Mahomes has looked the worst that he ever has in his entire career, at least statistically, it's just kind of an interesting thing to see. And it's making us as NFL fans think, wow, the Chiefs are really about to win again.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right. I'm going to keep rooting for him, and we'll just see what happens. But let's get into this here. Some of the things we're going to be talking about. First of all, if you listen to this podcast, I've been dying of an illness for 3 weeks, so I'm going to try not to cough right in your ears, but no promises on that front. We're going to be talking about a few things here. Jameis might be the savior of Cleveland, which, that doesn't come as a surprise to any NFL fan, but apparently it comes as a surprise to the owners and GM of the Browns. So that's good news that Jameis got in there and got the job done. The Bengals are still ass. I don't know if they're ever going to figure it out. I think it's just, we'll talk about it more in detail, but their defense is just so pathetic that no matter how good Joe Burrow is, it's just never going to make a difference. And then, Matthew Cahan, you're a pretty professional guy. I could see you like on ESPN or one of these networks. Like you conduct yourself in that way. But I got a feeling we're going to see a dark side of you when we talk about this Bears game where the Commanders won in just the last second with a ridiculous Hail Mary and maybe some on-the-field antics that allowed that to happen. So we'll talk about all that and much more. But first, we got to give a shout out to our sponsor, Erica's Healthy Pet. She's always there for us. And by the way, she'll always be there for you too. So go to ericashealthypet.com. You can get cheesy bites, turkey jerky, beef liver chews, sweet potato chips, and so much more for your pet. So dog treats, cat treats. They also have like ointment that you can put on their fur and the skin. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need for your pet. It really is great. I've told stories about how they saved my life with my German Shepherds and their antics in the past. So go to ericashealthypet.com. Use promo code LB20 for 20% off your first order. Again, ericashealthypet.com with promo code LB20 for 20% off. So let's start off with the Rams, because there were some people saying, hey, This team might need to start selling assets. They might need to start selling Cooper Kupp. Matthew Stafford might just stop playing football. And then all of a sudden, everybody comes back from the hospital. They have all their weapons on the field. Puka Nacua looks incredible. And they beat the Vikings, who look like one of those juggernaut teams. So the Rams, is this a team that can turn their season around? I just want to start by talking about their schedule for a second, because going forward, if the Rams can stay healthy, they've got the Seahawks, Dolphins, Patriots, Eagles, Saints, Bills, 49ers, Jets, Cardinals, and Seahawks remaining on the schedule. If they look going forward like they looked this week, is there any one of those teams that they can't beat? I mean, this is a team that could turn it around.
I completely agree with you. I think that, you get Puka and Kupp back at the same time, which is pretty surprising because nobody thought Puka was coming back this week. And you look at the remaining schedule, the divisional games are always going to be not 50-50, but they're going to be tough. I can't confidently say that them or Seattle's going to get the win, but I think that, they pose a threat. And Seattle got blown out this week by Buffalo, and the Rams are coming off a really good win. So I like the Rams to have momentum going into this week. But when I look at the schedule also, I mean, Dolphins and Patriots, both teams with 2 or 3 wins. Eagles have had a couple good wins, but then you have the Saints who have not looked great. Jets obviously haven't looked great. So when it comes to the NFC, and it's a pretty tough conference, surprisingly, it's better than the AFC this year. Is 10 wins going to be enough to make it? Because I could see the Rams winning. What would that be? That would be winning all but 3 of their last games, because they're sitting at 3-4 right now. So going 7-3. I feel like they could go 7-3 if they're able to stay healthy.
Yeah, that's the big if, because they got some aging assets there. But man, when they're on the field, I mean, but in the preseason, we were talking about the Rams. This was like, okay, they have a chance to really compete. Now, whether or not we're talking about next year or the year after that, I don't know what this team's going to look like. But this year, with this roster and this coaching staff, they have a real chance to compete. And then we all fell into the abyss of, oh, look at this team now, all these injuries, they look terrible, they're losing games. I think they might come back. They might be back. And when I look at their remaining schedule, I look at the Bills, and with the Bills, the way they're playing right now, coming off a couple huge wins, Josh Allen is, I think he's thrown 1 pick this year that came this week. And outside of that, he's been perfect with the ball. Obviously, like you said, the Seahawks are going to be tough, but if the Seahawks are going to roll over like they did against the Bills, there aren't very many teams on this list that I look at and I would pick over the Rams. So we'll see if they can figure it out. But let's flip the script here and let's talk about the Vikings. Is there anything you would take away from that? I mean, did this humble them a little bit? Are you a little bit more conservative on your outlook on the Vikings? Is Sam Darnold coming back to earth? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a crazy betting man, but a lot of people were very heavy on the Rams to cover the spread this past week, and I think that was their game to win. Coming into LA, Thursday Night Football, they're fully healthy, and that was their game to win. So I don't think the Vikings are a bad team. I don't think that they're screwed by any means. I think they just happen to be in a really tough division in the NFC North, and these losses are going to hurt when you have Detroit sitting at 6-1 and Green Bay sitting at 6-2, and even Chicago, who, we took a bad loss this week, but we're still sitting here at 4-3, definitely in playoff contention. So I think the Vikings are a very good team, and they're a playoff worthy team. You got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson coming back this week, and Aaron Jones. Their skill positions are great offensively, and they have a great defense, and Darnold is playing the role of a game manager very well. But at the end of the day, I don't think that their firepower is enough to win against some of these teams in the NFC. And to be honest, I think that's the case for most teams in the NFC, because I don't think that anyone can beat Detroit. I just don't think anyone can.
So you're a Bears fan, elephant in the room. Will you rank the NFC North?
Lions are 1. They're just too good even without Hutch. Obviously with Hutch, they're definitely 1, but even without him, their defense has been playing well, and their offensive line is one of the best I've ever seen. 2 is Green Bay, who also, they're very similar to Detroit in the way that they're coached very well, and they're very good all around. Their defense has a lot of rookies on it that have performed very well, and their offense has really not looked great, yet they're still sitting here at 6-2. Jordan Love having a lot of picks on the season so far, and he also might be hurt for a little bit. I'd go them at 2. It's really tough between now the Vikings.
This is what I want you to talk about, though.
It's really tough. But I'm going to actually take the Bears over the Vikings here. I just think that And I know that for the rest of this season, we're going to be stuck with this coaching staff, unfortunately, but the Bears are so talented. Like, we are genuinely in all of these games, and our coaching is so poor. Shane Waldron has called a brutal game for multiple games this season. Eberflus, we have, obviously, I know we're going to get to the Washington game, but it's like, I think everyone knows that Eberflus is not the guy for the job. He's a good defensive mind, and he has definitely helped our defense a lot, but he's not the guy that you want running the show at head coach. However, I think that we are more talented than the Vikings, and I think that in division games can go either way, but I think that Caleb will grow by that point, and I think that we'll be able to outlast them because I don't know if they're going to be able to consistently score on our defense, but I'm hoping that our offense will be able to figure out the blitzing scheme that, Brian Flores sends out on every play.
Yeah, the Bears' offensive line is just real hit and miss. And that makes me nervous against this Vikings defense that looks incredible. Obviously they gave up 30 points this week, though. They can bleed, so you just got to figure it out. So we'll see. I like that take. I don't know if I agree with it, but maybe I'll just hold my tongue until we get a little bit later in the season. Let's move on here. We mentioned the Packers. The Packers take on the Jags. They win 30-27. Trevor Lawrence looks good. He's looked good for several weeks now. I mean, honestly, and you've got it in the notes here. I agree with you. You can't blame the failures of this Jaguars organization this season on Trevor Lawrence. We like to talk shit on him. We call him Sunshine. We call him Sarah Jessica Parker. But in reality, he's playing pretty well. What's the answer here? I mean, is it just a Doug Peterson problem for the Jags?
I feel like it kind of is a Peterson problem, but their roster is also very depleted. Like you said, Trevor Lawrence has played very well. I wrote that in the notes. Obviously, I'm a big Trevor Lawrence fan. I've always advocated for him, but at the beginning of the season, I couldn't advocate for him very hard. I think he did make a lot of mistakes, and I think that he wasn't helping. But if you had to look at his quarterback efficiency in the last few weeks, he has played some unbelievable football. And now it's like all of his weapons are disappearing. Christian Kirk goes down with a season-ending injury. Now, Brian Thomas Jr., who's had an incredible year, he goes down. He might be out for 2 to 3 weeks. Travis Etienne's already been down. Evan Ingram was down for 4 to 5 weeks. It's really tough to keep giving players chances, but I just refuse to give up on Lawrence when I know that Peterson has not done well as a coach. They have not done anything to address this offensive line any offseason. They've been bottom 5 for multiple years now. And the defense just lets up points consistently. I mean, Trevor Lawrence went down. End of the game. Thomas is out. Kirk is out. He's got no receivers, and he drives down on that Packers defense. So the same one that CJ Stroud could barely throw against last week, and he scored a touchdown to tie the game with a minute left. And then, of course, what do you know? The defense lets up a 50-yard play from Malik Willis, and then all of a sudden the Packers obviously win the game. So I think it's just hard to blame Lawrence in this situation, but that's what the media is always going to do.
You think they just got a loser mentality problem? They can get right there, but they can't get over the hump. You think it's like and ultimately that comes down to coaching. I know I'm kind of saying that tongue in cheek. It's a little bit of a joke, but when you can't get over the hump and you can't figure out quite how to get the win in a game where you very well could have won, it kind of comes down to coaching. And we've been saying it, last week we looked at, Alan and I looked at the schedule for the Jags and tried to decide, because they've got a tough stretch coming up where they're playing a lot of good teams, tried to decide which game would be Doug Peterson's last game. My guess was next week. And I can't remember off the top of my head now who they're playing. I think it was the Eagles. I think if they get shellacked by the Eagles, we might see the end of Doug Peterson there. What do you think about that?
I agree with this take here. I just don't see any reason at this point to necessarily keep him around. I think he's been mismanaging his players. The team, just like you said, it's a culture issue. And I think that I have a lot of similar thoughts about the Bears in that demand, and that really comes down to coaching. I mean, everyone would say right now the best cultures, you have Kansas City, you have Detroit, and those are the teams that are the most disciplined and the teams that aren't going to make those little mistakes and are going to play complete games. And that's the issue with a team like the Jaguars is for however many good plays that they have, there's going to be a monumental mistake in that game somewhere. Somewhere, somehow, something crazy is going to happen where they mess up. And that's just the difference of winning and losing games, especially when you don't have a top tier roster.
Do we have to give some flowers to Malik Willis? Because now time and time again this season, he's been asked to come in and lead this team, and He does it. He gets the job done. Now, the good news for Jordan Love and Packers fans is that it looks preliminarily right now, I haven't seen anything definitive, but it looks like the injury is not all that serious. He'll be okay. They did an MRI. It was a groin injury, and I don't know how much time he's going to miss, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be a lot. And like you said, you put them in the number 2 spot in the NFC North, which is the best division in football right now. So this is a very good team, especially with Jordan Love at the helm. Where do you see the Packers season going, assuming that Jordan Love can avoid, getting knocked out for multiple games and he can come back and everything's going to be fine?
I think the Packers will be a wild card. They'll most likely, in my opinion, be the 5 seed because we can't, obviously the 4 division winners are going to be the 1 through 4. And I think they'll be the top team outside of, the division winners to be in that seed. It's tough because they're not going to have that home field advantage for any of the playoffs, but this team is great top to bottom. They have a great culture there. They have great coaching. And I think the sky is the limit. They're not filled with a lot of big names. And I think that's where people kind of get misconstrued about the Packers situation is they don't have these crazy flashy players on either side of the ball where you're like, wow, like they have star power and star power. It's just they have a bunch of guys who know how to play together, who are coached well in the system and who fit well within the system. And when you put all those things together, it equates winning football. So I think the ceiling for this team is going to the Super Bowl, to be honest. But again, I would not pick them to move past a team like Detroit, especially with the home field advantage. But if I'm looking at my top contenders in the NFC to make a Super Bowl, Green Bay is definitely in the top 3.
Speaking of top contenders, are the Cardinals a contender? I don't know what to think about this team because some weeks you watch them and they look like, Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't exist and they can't figure out how to play football. And then in the wake of the new Call of Duty coming out, everyone expected Kyler Murray to suck. He's got this whole narrative around him. And guess what? He plays a phenomenal game and this Cardinals offense looks unstoppable. Now, they were playing the Dolphins. The Dolphins over the last few weeks have been really bad, but big news, of course, is Tua's back. And I know people like me were optimistic. Maybe, hey, that's the switch that needed to be flipped. Obviously, they struggled without their franchise quarterback, but they couldn't get the job done against the Cardinals. So, Slapdawg, he's a big Cardinals fan. He has been both in and totally out, depending on the week of this season, which is understandable. I think that is representative of how Cardinals fans feel right now. What are your thoughts on the Cardinals going forward? What do you think about this game?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get to watch much of this game, but I know that the Dolphins were winning for 95% of the game. They might have been winning the entire game, and I think the Cardinals ended up walking it off on a game-winning field goal. But I think the case of the Cardinals is they just aren't very threatening. Like they are a solid football team. They're in no way a bottom-tier football team, and they're in no way a top-tier football team. They got a lot of holes on both sides of the ball, and we've seen a lot of inconsistency. My biggest thing about them is just kind of continuing to develop the offense. I don't think wins and losses matter as much this season. I think it's about developing a connection between Kyler to Marv, Kyler to Trey McBride, getting guys like Michael Wilson involved, seeing, what you got out of Trey Benson, just kind of seeing what you have and kind of building connection for future seasons. Because I think I don't know if you'd agree with me on this, but I don't see the Cardinals doing much. I would be surprised if they made the playoffs, and I would be surprised if they did anything besides lose in the first round of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think if you look up the term frisky in the dictionary, you're going to see a big picture of Kyler Murray because you can't really count him out of any game, but they're also not a franchise that is instilling a lot of confidence in their fan base each and every week. So I don't know. I think they're firmly in the category of they're fun to watch sometimes. And I do enjoy turning on Cardinals games and watching, which is more than can be said about a lot of Cardinals history. So they're moving in the right direction, in my opinion, which is good news. But I agree with you ultimately. I don't have faith in this team to find a ton of success this season. But let's talk about Tua, and let's talk about this Dolphins team. I have been on the record saying Tua's got bigger problems. Well, maybe not bigger problems. Tua's got more problems than just concussions, because before he got this concussion that knocked him out for a few weeks, he looked terrible, and this offense just could not figure out how to get going. Obviously this week they put up some points. Tyreek Hill got involved. I think he had 75 yards receiving, something like that. But they lost to the Cardinals in a game where all their fans were expecting, okay, we got our missing piece back. We're back to being the top offense in football. I don't know what to think about the Dolphins either going forward. And I don't know if their fans should be rejuvenated and feel like, hey, we got our guy back, we're going to figure it out, or if this season has just been one bump after another on a long road to ultimately failure.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on them. Obviously, they only sit here with 2 wins, so it's hard to even consider them anything more than a team that's like scraping to get back into the playoff race. But their defense was great for that whole stretch that Tua was out. It was like their defense was keeping them in games, but then at the end of the day, the offense couldn't get anything going. And then finally, Tua comes back, and the offense scores 27 points, and then they lose on a game-winning field goal where, they have a 5-minute drive and the defense folds. So this team just seems very inconsistent. And what do you know about inconsistency? It starts with the coaching. I have aired my thoughts on the Fantasy Brains about Mike McDaniel and, how he is not that great of a coach. But I think that, week in, week out, I believe he is on the hot seat and that his job is very much in jeopardy because this Dolphins team, I do believe, is very talented. Aside from, we talked about Doug Peterson and being with that Jags team, I don't think that Jags team has very much talent. But when I look at this Dolphins team and you have Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane, and then you have a great defense that's coordinated by Vic Fangio. The fact that you can't put up points with or without Tua is very concerning, and it kind of shows that he's in need of a specific player in order to make his system work. So I'm not too frightened by this Dolphins team. I think they're just like one of those teams that could beat anyone. Like they could come out and beat the Chiefs or, come out and beat somebody that's really good. And then they could also come out and then lose to a really bad team. So I want to get my hopes up very high if I was a Dolphins fan right now.
So you don't think knocking out the franchise quarterback for several weeks, I just talked about it. The Tua looked bad even before the injury, but I think in a lot of fans' minds, it's like this is a hard reset. Now Mike McDaniel's clock, it starts over, and we don't have to start blaming him for like a whole bunch of weeks, and they have to look really bad. I tend to think that, well, I guess I'll ask your opinion. When you say he's on the hot seat, what does that actually mean? Does that mean if they string together a few losses against teams they should beat, he's like a mid-season fire? Or you think that this is after the season, they're going to have some talks?
I think if they lost a couple games that they should be winning, if they ended, I think if they, I don't know like how the record will stand, but I think if they lose a couple of games in a row, then he could be gone. I guess it doesn't really matter as much to fire your coach mid-season. Like firing him week 13 when you're already out of the playoff race, as opposed to right after the season ends. I mean, call a spade, who cares? But it's like, I think he's gone regardless. And I think that he could be an interesting offensive coordinator somewhere because he definitely has a bright mind. And I think everybody knows that, but I don't think he knows enough to coach a team to the full extent. And I think on top of that, he needs somebody else helping out with the creative side because he has a lot of good plays and he has a really good scheme, but it's just been figured out by a lot of other teams in the NFL. And when your scheme starts to get figured out and you're not making adjustments, that's where you start to see teams really go down. And I'm a little curious to see, kind of on a different note, like what happens to the Commanders in that regard too, because the Commanders, who are run in a situation with Cliff Kingsbury, who's a very, creative coach, rookie quarterback, not a lot of weapons, where people are like, how is this offense so good? I think it's a similar situation where teams start to watch the tape and they're like, wow, this offense is not as complicated as we once thought. And then they start to get stopped a little bit more. And I think that's just happened with the Dolphins this entire season.
Yeah. Well, I got breaking news for you. I don't know if you've heard this, but Jameis Winston is better than Deshaun Watson. Like, Jesus Christ, this is so annoying because we talked about this in several episodes this year. Why the hell was Deshaun Watson not benched? And I know the contract and I know blah, 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 and people are blaming the coaching, but it's like, this situation was so ridiculous that there's no way it wasn't over the coach's head. Like, there's no way that this wasn't like a mandate from on high in that front office or from the GM saying, hey, or the owner saying, we cannot bench our quarterback. We cannot admit defeat on Deshaun Watson. But then Deshaun Watson gets injured, and we hope he recovers. But we finally get to see Jameis Winston. And Jameis Winston as a starter, I think he's only started like 9 games in his career or something like that. And he's like 7-2, and he's like I don't remember. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was like 22 touchdowns to 3 interceptions or something ridiculous. Jameis Winston is a very, very capable backup. And I think there's a chance he's more than a backup. And we'll see that going forward in future seasons. But it is ridiculous to me that they waited so long. Obviously, their hand was forced on Deshaun Watson. But Jameis looks good. And the Browns come out and beat the Ravens 29-24. I'm sure you have some thoughts on the Ravens and how they're handling their business and their consistency issues. But what did you think about Jameis Winston? And I'm gonna preface that question with this. I saw this on Instagram. I don't remember what post it was. It was on some big account. And somebody commented. The guy's name was Black Fred Flintstone, and he seems like a very funny guy. And his question was, how does Jameis take things that Russell Wilson would say in his pregame speeches, but he makes them awesome? And I don't know. It's just a personality difference, but I think this speaks to something real and something larger, that Jameis Winston, as a personality, as a leader, makes football fun. And I think he makes football fun for the fans. He makes football fun for the players. And he just changes the atmosphere of this organization that has a ton of talent in a lot of different places, but just this season has completely fallen flat for one reason or another. So let's talk a little bit about Jameis Winston. I'd love to hear you glaze him up with me.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I agree with you in the fact that he kind of ignited a spark under this Browns team. Like, it just seems like the Browns are playing dead behind Watson. There was no energy. There was no need to get better this season. But with Winston, one thing he's going to do is he's going to come out with his personality. And I think that he comes out in this game and he, whatever he does, he gives them a nice little pregame speech, or he gets some hype in the huddle, whatever that might be. But he is going to sling it. And he is, Jameis Winston, he's infamously known for the 30-30 season, where 30 interceptions, 30 touchdowns. And you kind of got to know that when you have Jameis Winston. There's going to be ups and there's going to be downs. But the one thing that you do have to know is that he's going to sling it. And I think that outside of the fact that the Browns actually figured out a way to win this game, you just have to be excited as a Browns fan that this season might be a little bit entertaining. When you have a quarterback like Jameis Winston, you're going to throw for a lot of yards, which is, again, way more entertaining than seeing your quarterback throw for 150 yards and get sacked every play.
Yeah, that's music to my ears. We've been saying it for weeks, that at the very least you get a more entertaining product and you get the fans bought back in. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Win or lose, the fans are more invested now than they have been at any point throughout the season, which is obviously good news for Browns fans. But let's move over to maybe not so good news. Ravens putting up 24 points, they just look up and down. They have some weeks where they just look dominant, and then they have other weeks where they're losing games that they should not be losing. I think if you took a poll of NFL fans across the country, they would choose the Ravens as the most likely team out of the AFC to make a Super Bowl. And yet we have games like this, and I don't know what to think about them. Obviously, Lamar Jackson is playing out of his mind. He's incredible, and the Ravens can beat anybody in the league. But are they able to establish consistency to a degree high enough that they can actually compete for a title?
I don't know I think that of any year that was their year, I think it was last year. And I think that Lamar has came out every single year and looked better, which just means that with Lamar, on a similar level to Mahomes, you always know that as long as you have him, that he's going to be able to make great things happen. But this Ravens team, it does concern me a little bit. I still think they're going to make the playoffs. This game was divisional game in Cleveland, where it was kind of one of those games where the Ravens had everything to lose and the Browns had nothing to lose. And I think the Ravens went in there and got a little scared early on when the Browns started playing hard against them, and they kind of got beat. And then throughout that, they had to kind of come from behind, and the Browns kept it going, and the defense wasn't able to get a stop. So I think this just comes down to understanding that divisional games are going to be tight, and especially in the AFC North, where battles are won in the trenches, and these teams have been fighting for so long that these coaches know how each other's teams play. Like, how many times have the Browns faced Lamar at this point? They face him twice a year, and I'm not saying that means that they know how to defend him, but I think that they know how to defend him better than other teams in the NFL would. And I think that they pulled out some tricks, and their offense was able to get going, and the Ravens took a bad L. But where would you rank them in the AFC? Obviously, Kansas City is 1 right now, but would you put them 2 right now in the AFC?
If I'm being honest, and I'm basing it on what I see on the field, I'm putting the Ravens above the Chiefs, and I'm considering putting the Bills above the Chiefs, because these are, obviously I'm a jaded Chiefs fan, which I know to a lot of people is a ridiculous thing to say after winning a bunch of Super Bowls. But watching this offense, seeing the early Patrick Mahomes offenses and just seeing how explosive and unbeatable they looked, and then looking how the product on the field on offense, won't surprise anyone to hear me say this, is garbage. And when I look at the Ravens, like if they come into Arrowhead or we have to go to Baltimore, I am terrified of that game because I truly do think that the Ravens are capable of beating anyone in the NFL. So they're right there at the top for me. But they do just have to figure out this consistency because, in this game, there were a lot of drops, just a lot of ticky-tack things that could have changed the game. And if the Ravens can just keep putting it all together, like I said, they can beat anybody. And I would be surprised if they don't make a deep playoff run this year.
They've had, see, I agree with you because it's a lot of consistency issues with, in my opinion, their identity. I feel like they don't understand who they are yet. And this kind of comes to something that we've talked a lot about on FantasyBrainz is looking at the production of some of their high-end players. There are games where Derrick Henry will go out there and have 25 carries for 150 yards and a touchdown. And then we see Lamar throw for a very mediocre passing game. And, he's still running, of course, because it's Lamar. And then we see, Zay Flowers has a weak game or Mark Andrews has a weak game. And then we see games where the Ravens are playing from behind and they have to air the ball out and then they completely abandon the run game. It's a little interesting to see how inconsistent they've been. And I just feel like their identity needs to involve more correlation between the two and more of like a mixture where you're running and passing and switching things up. And while I know that, Lamar, like you said, Lamar has played to an MVP level this season and it's hard to critique their offense, I think that they could be scoring at a higher level than they currently are, even if it's already a lot of points.
Well, from a fantasy perspective, I've been excited to see Mark Andrews. He got in the end zone a couple times over the last couple weeks, and that's been good because, man, I'm in one league that once I drafted. It's a work league. I know these people are kind of casual football fans. I drafted, and I'm like, I am gonna run away with this. But I ended up with Mark Andrews late in the draft. I thought it was a great value pick, and holy shit, has he completely fucked me. But now we're starting to see it come back. On National Tight Ends Day, he gets in the end zone again. I don't know if you knew this. It was National Tight Ends Day, if you didn't hear that 76 billion times over the course of Sunday football.
Oh, I heard it because I luckily placed a parlay with a touchdown for Tucker Kraft with Sam Laporta, Travis Kelce, and Kate Auden. So I was able to cash out heavily on that tight end day while also watching George Kittle win me my fantasy matchup in my main league. So I thoroughly enjoyed the day as a whole.
It's going to be amazing because I don't know about you. Obviously, you figured it out early, but after another National Tight Ends Day where tight ends are just going off, like, okay, is this just like offensive coordinators are like, it's National Tight Ends Day, let's get our tight ends involved? Is it that simple that's what's happening on this day?
I think so, because at the end of the day, a lot of things that happen in the NFL are based off scheme. So I think that, comes down to the 5-yard line or they're even at the 1-yard line. Let's see if we can get our tight end a touchdown today. It's National Tight End Day. And especially when the position doesn't get very much love, especially this season, I think the coordinators just wanted to show them a good time this week. So I think that, you gotta respect the position. You gotta respect, what they do for you on the field with blocking and catching. So, can't hate at all on National Tight End Day.
Well, I'm not missing out on it again as a degenerate. I am putting a lot of money on tight ends next year for National Tight End Day.
As you should.
Let's move on to my second favorite topic that any human being could ever discuss, which is the Bengals sucking. The first is, of course, Chiefs Super Bowls, but the second, the Bengals suck. As I kind of teased in the beginning, this Bengals offense has potential to be incredible. I mean, obviously they have weapons everywhere. They can put up points. The question is, are they able to compete with their own defense? Are they able to put up points at a faster rate than what their defense allows? And if they're not playing the Patriots and if they're not playing the Giants, it seems like the answer is no. This defense is atrocious, and the Eagles ran all over them 37-17. We'll talk about the Eagles too because we got a whole discussion to have with that, but I just don't have anything to tell to Bengals fans to make them feel better because the fact of the matter is you've got MVP level talent on the offensive side and your defense is just pathetic.
I mean, I think you hit it right on the coffin. The Bengals Joe Burrow has actually been unbelievable this season. Like, he has looked great in pretty much every game that I've watched this season. Jamar Chase, I think he's the number one receiver in the NFL in terms of production right now. T. Higgins has been a little banged up and he was out this week, but when he's been in, he's been very good as well. Like you said, the defense just going to hold them back, and I think that's going to be a theme all season. I could see them going on a big win streak because when you have Joe Burrow, anything is possible, and you can find a way to win these games. But I think Zach Taylor is a guy that could be on the hot seat. A lot of people have begun starting to call for his head. And while I think that he made a Super Bowl a few years back and he's done some good things, it's hard to waste away these prime years where you have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. Because now T. Higgins could be on the move next year. And we saw this offense did look a little bit worse this week without Higgins. I mean, I don't think Jamar Chase can do everything on his own. As much as talented as he is, we've seen in Dallas this year what teams can do against CeeDee Lamb. And obviously he had a terrific game last night or, a few nights ago, and he's had a solid season. But when you only have one good option on the offensive side of the ball, it becomes way easier for teams to zone in on that guy, double him, and really not allow him to get the ball on a consistent basis. And it's going to be interesting to see how Cincinnati handles this offseason because Higgins is a bona fide stud at a wide receiver too.
I don't even know if they have the option of keeping him. I mean, I'm not an expert at looking at contracts and all this stuff, but it's been talked about for years now that they're going to have to figure something out with these contracts with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. I don't know if it's going to be an option. And at this point, they need to make some serious moves on the defensive side of the ball because we can all sit here and gawk at this offense all day long and talk about how great it is. But as we've seen throughout this season, you're not going to win as many games as you should when your defense is giving up a whole shitload of points. So let's move over to the Eagles, though. This is another team that's just very confusing. And I would put them in the same category as some of the other teams we've discussed with just kind of a culture problem. And I think Sirianni's a big part of that problem. If you talk to Eagles fans, they're sick of Sirianni. They want him out. But Eagles fans are sort of like Cardinals fans this season, which is like, depending on the week, they're all in or they want to burn the city down. So I don't know what to think about the Eagles. I don't know looking forward if this is a team that's going to have, make it to the postseason, have postseason success, or if this is just kind of a middle of the road team, which is, we talk about Jalen Hurts making it to a Super Bowl and, that was great, but that was kind of the exception, not the rule. And this just might be the Eagles. I mean, it just might be their culture and how they conduct themselves going forward.
I mean, I agree with you in the fact that, and I think all Eagles fans would agree, Nick Sirianni has to go. I think he's done after the season unless they make a deep playoff run. But I think the good thing that you can really rejoice about as an Eagles fan right now, they're 5-2, right? Or are they 5-3? They're 5. I believe they're 5-2. And so, or you know what? Maybe they might be 5-3. But I think they're second in the division, obviously behind the Commanders. And the Bears kind of put out a blueprint this week of, stopping the Commanders' offense. But as an Eagles fan, with all the injuries that have gone on this year, with Goddard's been out for a couple games, Smitty was out for a few games, A.J. Brown was out for a few games, and you have all those guys plus Saquon Barkley, the offense is always going to be able to put up points, and Philly is always going to be a tough place for opponents to come in and play. So I think this Eagles team is most likely going to make the playoffs. I could still see them winning the division, but I think that right now, if you're an Eagles fan, you're looking at a lot of positive things. It's a lot of shitty coaching, but they're finding a way to win games, and beating Cincinnati by 20 points, no matter how bad their defense is a very dominant win, in my opinion.
Yeah, and they are confirmed 5-2. So they've, the ceiling is, or the ceiling is the sky, right? Because I don't know. It's difficult for me to speak coherently about the Eagles because it just seems like with Sirianni at the helm, we saw them collapse last season. They had obviously they added Saquon Barkley, but they had a potent offense last year for the first half of the season, and then we just saw an utter and complete collapse. And part of me thinks as long as Sirianni's there, I don't think he has the respect of the players. I think a couple things go bad, and you have just a cultural firestorm in that locker room, and you never know. But they certainly have the talent, so I guess Eagles fans can hang their hat on that. Let's talk about someone who might not have the talent. What do you think about Anthony Richardson? Because obviously there's a lot of hype about this guy. He's big and fast and strong and is a physical specimen, but he might just suck at quarterback. I don't know how else to say it because when Joe Flacco steps in the game, and in this game he did step in because Anthony Richardson pulled himself out of the game because he was tired, which is the first time I've ever seen an NFL quarterback do that ever in my entire life. But say what you will about that, it happened. Joe Flacco comes in for one play, but in the past when Joe Flacco has stepped in, he's made this offense look pretty competent and look like a team that can compete with a lot of competition. But Anthony Richardson in there making wild throws, making wild decisions. Is he just not the answer, or is he just someone that is a victim of the fact that he was injured for his entire football career? He doesn't have a lot of starting experience, and he just needs to develop a little bit more to become the star that everyone hoped he would be.
It took me about a quarter and a half this season of watching Anthony Richardson to say this guy is not going to be good this year. He just lacks the common skills that you need to be a successful quarterback, or not even successful, but an elite or very good quarterback in the NFL. A lot of people get hung up on like the flashy things, the speed and the strength and the size, and being able to toss an unbelievable deep ball, which he did week 1, where he threw 3 long touchdowns against the Texans, and everyone was, exploding and getting crazy hype for the AR-15 season where he goes off. He can't make the intermediate or short throws consistently. And when you can't do that, you can't move the ball consistently, which means you have less opportunities to succeed. This Colts team is good. They sit here now, I think, they're 4-4 now. There's a lot of stuff to be excited about as a Colts fan. Jonathan Taylor's look great. They have Josh Downs, who's on a breakout season, and their defenses look solid at times. But if I were them, I would put in Joe Flacco as soon as next week. Anthony Richardson is so poor as a quarterback, at least right now, that he is not startable. And when you have a team that's sitting here at 4-4, where the only other really competitive team in the division is the Texans right now with 6 wins, they're not out of it at all. Stephon Diggs looks like he might be done for the season. Nico Collins is banged up. This Texans team is by no means a lock to make it to the playoffs. I would put Flacco in because he has clearly given you a better chance to win games. And I would put AR on the bench and continue trying to develop him. Am I saying they should throw away the AR project completely? No, because they don't have any other direction to go in for the future. But when Flacco is clearly the better option for this season, I don't know how you can continue to start Richardson.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm also torn between the fact that, as I said, one of the biggest knocks on Anthony Richardson is the fact that he just doesn't have a lot of starting experience at pretty much any level. So the question is he, if he is the guy that you want to invest in for the future, is he better developed on the bench or on the field? Is it worth saying we're not going to get the best product on the field for a while, but this is the way we help him grow? Or is it better to sit behind Joe Flacco, who has been a competent quarterback for our entire lives, and help him learn from that? Is that better or worse than sending him out there and letting him make mistakes?
I would personally put him on the bench. I think that they've given him chances to go out there and play well, and he just has not looked great. And again, sports is all about a business. It's all about selling tickets. It's all about, producing on the field. And if you had, let me ask you a question. If you were the Colts head coach right now and your job is potentially on the line, who would you start? Because at the end of the day, while I do think Steichen is a good coach, and I don't think that his, job is at all going to be, let go of, I don't think he's going to be fired. He is still always every day fighting to keep his job. And so if I'm him and I'm looking to keep my job, I'm not going to start a player who gives us a significantly worse chance to win.
Yeah, no, I said that same thing several weeks back, that it's just the team is better off with Joe Flacco right now. And ultimately, Joe Flacco, it's tough to hang on to a QB2 as an organization. So it's possible that Joe Flacco goes and moves on. And at that point, maybe Anthony Richardson is your best bet in future seasons. But right now, it's just clear to everybody that he is not your best bet. The whole team benefits from Joe Flacco being on the field as opposed to Anthony Richardson. You're going to keep the locker room stuff at bay for a little bit longer. And by the way, you're going to win some more games. So to me, it's a no-brainer. I agree with you 100%. And I've been saying it for weeks that Anthony Richardson is exciting. He's fun to watch, but he's not ready yet. And ultimately, when you're a Colts team that has some talent, you can compete. As we saw last season, they're kind of on the cusp of making a playoff run with competent quarterback play. You got to put in Joe Flacco. And that's that's as simple as it is for me. But I don't know what they do long term, because you bench Anthony Richardson, you have some success with Joe Flacco. Are you then trying to pursue other options at quarterback, depending on if you end up at a team with 9 or 10 wins? How do you handle that? Or do you just reinvest in Anthony Richardson down the line? There's kind of a lot of layers to this conversation. But for me, it's as simple as, well, Joe Flacco gives you the chance to win right now, so put Joe Flacco in. I know one last point that you put on the notes here to underscore his performance so far. Anthony Richardson ranks 222nd in completion rate among the 225 quarterbacks with 250-plus dropbacks since the year 2000, and that's almost a quarter century ago for all you math whizzes out there. So that's a stat that's been tossed around a lot after this last week. I've seen it kind of all over the place, but it does underscore the point that this has been pretty bad. It's not just like kind of on the line. No, it's been pretty bad. Let's talk about a team who is not at all bad, and that is the Detroit Lions. I said it last week, and if you've been listening to this show, you know, I've talked a lot of shit on Dan Campbell, rightfully so in my opinion, but there's just no question about it right now. This Lions team is a juggernaut. They're the best team in football right now as it stands, and it's pretty difficult to look at the future of the season without thinking, the Lions are going to make a Super Bowl appearance here, and everyone in Detroit is going to be super excited.
They just have everything going for them. They have a great coaching staff. They have a great culture right now. The fans are bought in. They genuinely have the best, one of the best offense I've ever seen constructed in my entire life. They have great Pro Bowl or all pro level O linemen at every single position. They have a great tight end. They have 2 great receivers, one of which is in Jamo, who's a terrific deep threat. The other in Amon-Ra, who's a terrific guy in the slot. And then you have 2 running backs. You have the ground and pound David Montgomery. And then you have Jahmyr Gibbs, who can light it up and score a 70-yard touchdown in the blink of an eye. And then you have Jared Goff at the helm, who can throw for a lot of yards, has a lot of playoff experience where he has made a Super Bowl in his career. And I just don't see many holes with this team. I don't see anyone out there being able to stop this offense consistently. And unless you can go out there and score 30-plus points on Detroit, I just don't see a way that they lose, because I think they're going to put up 30 points unless you have a very, very, very elite defense. Like, I'm curious to see how the Bears hold up against them and see, what's an elite defense in an in-division matchup going to do against this Detroit team. If they still wallop us, I don't see any team in the NFL beating the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to argue with that at this point in time, because the product that they've showed on the field, even without Aiden Hutchinson, I mean, they have some other stars on the defense, Brian Branch, they have people who make plays, but there's no doubt about it that Hutchinson is the heart and soul of their defensive unit. And even without them, the culture on the field, you can just see it, is just like, we are going to come out and we are going to steamroll you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And there aren't many teams in the NFL with just that visible mentality that, watching from home, watching from the stands, you can see that this team is elite at every facet. There's just no doubt about it. Now, when you get into the playoffs, anything can happen. It's not basketball. You don't get a best of 7 series any given Sunday, right? So I'm not saying they're going to go out and win a Super Bowl, but they've got to be the favorite right now as of this point in time. And I actually went into this game, I was talking to a buddy of mine, and I said, the Titans, they've been in every game, despite the fact that Will Levis has decided to hand the ball to the defense as many times as he possibly can. Like, the Titans are a frisky team, and even without Mike Vrabel, they've still managed to compete in most of their games. And I said going into this game, this is a little bit of a trap game for the Lions, because the Lions are on top of the world. The Titans are one of those teams that you can't really underestimate, otherwise they'll teach you why you shouldn't. And for the first quarter, I was like, see, it's 14-14. I told you. And then little did I know the Lions were going to score like 40 more points and the Titans were going to do nothing. And then we also have to mention, not to glaze the Lions too much because I'm not known to do that, this special teams unit is crazy. I mean, they put up like what was 175 yards of special teams and a couple touchdowns. Like, every single facet of the Lions team is elite. And there's just nothing any of us could do about it except for hope that it pans out well for our favorite teams in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's like they just have all cylinders of their team working every game. And they're just one of those elite teams, again, similar to the Chiefs, where they're going to make all of the plays and you have to take advantage. You have to be able to go, when you play Detroit, you have to know that when you have a chance to stop them on third down and you can stop the run on those first 2 plays, you got to get stops or else you're going to be screwed. Your defense is going to get tired. They're just going to run it down your throat. They are not afraid. That's the craziest thing about it is like they are not afraid to run the ball every single play of the drive if it's working. If they get 5-6 yards on the first play, they're going to run it again. Even if they get 3 yards, they might run it again. I've seen them run it on 3rd and 10. They just are very committed to playing to their strength rather than playing to how a lot of coaches coach football. And it works out well in their favor. And I think that kind of begs my question about the Lions is obviously it is looking a little far ahead, but Ben Johnson, who is the creative mastermind behind this team, obviously we don't know what the difference is between what he brings and what Campbell brings, but he's going to be probably the hottest guy on the coaching market. Pause, but hottest topic on the coaching market. And my thing is he going to leave this incredible Detroit situation where he has everything he could ask for and he has a chance to win a Super Bowl, or is he going to go and be a head coach somewhere? What do you think?
If it was anyone besides Ben Johnson, I would say, yeah, probably. But we've already seen Ben Johnson say, nah, I'm good. I'm going to stick it out here with Detroit. Now, if they go win a Super Bowl, there's a very good chance he leaves. I think that was a big reason why he came back to Detroit, because they sort of had that unfinished business. And I also think that mentality is one of the reasons why this team is so good, because last season, everyone knew they were going to be good. People kind of had them pegged as a wild card team, make a playoff run, but winning the division, going to the NFC Championship, and then losing, it was like they almost, it felt like they didn't expect that season to end on that big of a stage. And this season, they're not going to make that mistake again. They know who they are. They know they're elite, and they want to go for it all. And I think that's part of the reason Ben Johnson wanted to come back. It wasn't just the situation. It was the fact that, hey, I want to solidify my role with this great team. And I think he has a chance to do that. So if they go out and win a championship or they make a Super Bowl, I think there's a chance he leaves. But ultimately, the job appears to have to be really, really good. He's not going to go coach the Panthers. He's going to wait for a good opportunity, and he's certainly going to get one, whether it's next year or going forward. We got to talk about Kyle Pitts, because he made maybe the dumbest play I've ever seen a human being make. And I know there have been a couple of these clips throughout NFL history that you can pull up on the internet and see players walking into the end zone and dropping the ball or just, not finishing the play as they cross the goal line. This one's real controversial because apparently they didn't have a goal line camera. I don't know. That's what I keep hearing, is that they didn't have the line or the camera angle down the goal line to see if he dropped this ball. Of course, Kyle Pitts was walking into the end zone. He decides to start celebrating prematurely. The ball gets stripped right as he's crossing that goal line. And that was maybe the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And this is coming from someone, as I've said many times, Kyle Pitts, no matter what, I love this guy. He's doing great over the last 4 weeks. And by the way, Hunter said 4 weeks ago, if Kyle Pitts puts up at least 10 fantasy points in every game for the next 4 weeks, he's back on the train. This week, that solidified it with 2 touchdowns. So Hunter's back on the Kyle Pitts train. Don't let him tell you otherwise. He's all in for him too. But I don't know. This play just stands out in the mind after, the Falcons obviously won, beat the Bucs that didn't have anybody on offense. And, that's great for them. But this one play is like the one thing that people are going to remember about this game.
I was gonna say I looked a lot on Twitter and people were saying that they saw like a different angle of it, and it was so clearly out before he crossed. It looked like it was a full yard short. Now I'm not gonna go out there and complain about this because I had Kyle Pitts on my fantasy team and I won by 5 points. So if I don't get that touchdown, then I don't win this matchup. So I'm gonna be a little thankful that the refs kind of sold this call, but it's just kind of dumb, like as a player, especially where, you're in a tight division game and it's like, just get in the end zone, man. Just get in the end zone. You can celebrate all you want, but that's just the confidence that these players have in themselves. And they're like, I'm going to taunt. And, we're going to talk about it soon about taunting and what that can do to you as a player. But it just seems like something that's unnecessary. And he got bailed out because they called it a touchdown. But imagine it goes the other way and they end up losing this game. This is a very different storyline for him coming into today.
It's going to make it real hard for me to defend Kyle Pitts against the mob if he's just throwing games away like that. But it all worked out. It all worked out for them. Let's talk a little bit about Kirk Cousins, though, because this is an offense. I've been on the Falcons train all year. They disappointed me a couple weeks. They've looked awesome, in particular against the Bucs for whatever reason. And this is an offense that just has such a high ceiling. It seems like they can put up points when they want to, but then other times they just can't figure out how to put anything together. What do you think about the Falcons and their future this season? And then what do you think about Kirk Cousins' role in this offense? How is he facilitating? Is there room for improvement, or is a game against the Bucs maybe their ceiling? Is this all they can do?
Well, the Falcons have been great as of recent, and I think, in a lot of people's power rankings, they're inside the top 10 or inside the top 12, and especially with, the Bucs losing Godwin for the season and also losing Evans for a couple weeks, the Bucs start to go down a little bit, the power rankings here. I think the Falcons are the clear winner of this division at the end of the year, and a lot of people picked them to win the division. They were the favorites, and Kirk Cousins is running this offense like a pro. It looks like, the Minnesota Falcons out there or the Atlanta Vikings, whatever you want to call it. But in my opinion, this team is just the same as what the Vikings always was. You have Kirk Cousins with a lot of good weapons that are kind of diverse. You got Pitts and you got Bijan and you got Drake London and Mooney. And then I look back to what Cousins had in Minnesota, and he's had Jefferson and Diggs and Thielen and Dalvin Cook and Hawkinson. And I just see it built as a very similar system where it comes down to having, you have a mediocre defense that's inconsistent. And I think that's where their fate kind of lies, is that their division isn't very good, which will propel them to making the playoffs. But I do think that when they get to the playoffs, I could see them winning a game because they'll have the home field advantage. But I don't know if they have the manpower to beat a team like Detroit or even, Green Bay in this regard.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think they're kind of right on the cusp of being great, but maybe it'll take a quarterback change for them to cross that threshold, but we'll see. I've certainly been happy some weeks with the offensive production. Their offensive line has been decent. It's been better, and they have the capability to move the ball, but it just seems like that consistency isn't quite there, and we'll have to see if they can figure that out as the season moves on, but we're running a little bit out of time. They're going to have to start stringing some games together if they want to have a good postseason run. But I agree with you. I think they're going to win this division, if anything, because of these Bucs injuries. Obviously the discussion is between the Bucs and the Falcons, and I picked the Falcons preseason, and now it seems like that's only a stronger option. Okay, the time has come. I'm just going to set the stage for you, and then I'm going to hand the mic over, and I'm going to let you do your thing, because as a Bears fan, think of this as therapy. You're talking to the brainiacs. They want to hear your thoughts about the Bears and about how this game slipped away because of a ridiculous play. Well, in part because of a ridiculous play, but basically, if you are one of the few people that were living under a rock and didn't see it, the Bears lost on a last-second Hail Mary, which was tipped in the air and caught in the end zone by a Commanders wide receiver to end the Bears' hopes and dreams. And I just want you to tell me everything that you think. Maybe let it all out there. If you want to cuss some people out, go ahead and do it. But I'm giving the mic to you.
Brainiacs, I don't know if I've ever suffered as devastating of a heartbreak as I did. I think the double doink was definitely up there, and that's the number one because it was a playoff game. But I actually drove down with a couple of my buddies to watch. We drove 6 hours. We bought the tickets Saturday night at 1 a.m., right when we found out Daniels was active. Hopped in the car, drove 6 hours to watch this game. We scored 0 points in the first half. And then in the second half, you give me the most ultimate heartbreak of all time. Now, it's really hard to look at this game and blame one person because there were so many mistakes that had happened throughout. So I'd say, talking about the first 3 quarters of the game, Caleb Williams did not look good. He was missing throws consistently. He was not commanding the offense well. I mean, we had 0 points up until mid-third quarter, or end of the third quarter, actually. I'm not worried. I mean, I think we all know that Caleb has an absurd amount of talent. He's able to read a defense better than most quarterbacks in the league already, but he has had some accuracy issues early on, and that's something that he'll grow with and that he'll learn. But people also got to remember, he's a rookie. Let's just transition to the fourth quarter at this point. I mean, that's really the only part that matters. There were just so many mistakes that were made that just should not have been made. And these are the differences between winning teams and losing teams, is being able to make simple plays. Out of all the negatives that happened with Caleb Williams in this game, there was a big positive. He led 2 game-winning drives back-to-back at the end of the game, and he looked great in those game-winning drives. He rolled out of the pocket, made a terrific throw, cross-body to Keenan Allen for a first down. He converted multiple fourth downs, and as a Bears fan, that is just gracious to see that he was able to do that. But our coaching has made some boneheaded mistakes this year that have cost us games. We don't need to go back to the Colts game where, we ran 4 plays in a row at the 1-yard line and did not gain a yard. That happened again this week. Now, all of a sudden, we're at the goal line. It's 3rd and goal. We have Roschon Johnson, who's a great power back, and we hand it off to a backup offensive lineman, and he fumbles the ball. And even after that, we get the ball back because our defense is great. We go down and we score, get the 2-point, and I'm thinking in my head, wow, this Bears culture has changed. We really just went into Washington, led a game-winning drive when we played so bad this game. We go into the next drive, and again, I don't know how many Brainiacs out there were watching, but there's 5 seconds on the clock. The Bears, for some reason, even though the Commanders were only on their own 30-yard line, decide that they're just going to play everybody back, nobody up. The Commanders go ahead and take an easy 15-yard gain, which then puts them in Hail Mary range. Obviously, we all know what happened next. We all know what happened with Tyreek Stevenson. And I think that, I'm curious what your opinion is as a non-fan, because obviously, I'm pissed. And when I saw it mid-play. When the play started, I see Stevenson. I'm looking right at him. And I'm like, oh my God. I was talking to my friends. He is celebrating, looking at the crowd while receivers are running down the field. Of course, he ends up not knowing who his man is. He goes, tries to make a play, and tips the ball right to his man, and we lose the game. It's just very frustrating because obviously a Hail Mary is pure luck. It's throwing up a prayer. There's not much you can say about defending differently or doing this or doing that. But it's just the little plays that add up to put ourselves in that situation where eventually we're going to get screwed. And I think that's just the issue, is that we're an undisciplined team and we can't make those plays. And I would be very disappointed if Stevenson was not benched for at least 1 week for these actions. And I'm curious to see what you have to say about this game. But just as a Bears fan, it seemed like the tides were turning and we had finally gotten to a point as a franchise where we could play bad games and still find a way to win. But I guess I was wrong at the end of the day.
Well, first things first, I have to say that I picked the Commanders to win this game before I knew Jaden Daniels was coming back, that was a big risk because if he wasn't there, nobody's moving the ball against this. Marcus Mariota is not marching down the field on this Bears defense. But my thought was Jaden Daniels comes in, the Bears defense is really good. Bears offense has been kind of sporadic. Don't really know what to expect. But I think Jaden Daniels might be good enough to move the ball on the Bears defense. So I kind of expected a little bit of a shootout, which maybe goes against the grain. But that's what I thought. And of course, totally wrong. This game was ugly as shit. And honestly, the Commanders were able to move the ball pretty well, but they just fell apart in the red zone. It was ugly on both sides of the ball. So it was interesting to see it come down. But for me, Tyreek Stevenson, dude, that's a real problem because not only, first of all, yelling at the opposing field fans while the play is going on the last play of the game is a wild move. That's crazy in and of itself, of course. But then he broke the cardinal rule of Hail Mary defense. You say, it's all luck, which is true. I mean, the ball can bounce any direction, but as a defender, you are taught in a desperation play like that, the very last thing you should ever do is tip the ball up. It needs to go down. If you can get a hand on the ball, it needs to be with downward force. That's the way to stop it. If he spikes that ball into the ground or smacks it out of bounds, there's no problem. But by tipping it in the air, by jumping for a ball that you can barely touch, you are inviting the possibility that the offense is going to get some bullshit touchdown, which is exactly what happened. So there are 8 or 9 different coaching points that can happen for old Tyreek, and that needs to happen. And I honestly agree with you. They need to make an example out of him because this cannot be a culture issue. They have to say, if you're going to act like a moron, we're going to treat you like a moron and you're not going to play. That's the bottom line. And that's what needs to happen, whether it's for 1 week or several weeks or they sell him to a different team. But it's they need to make an example out of this guy right now and say this, we're trying to be a winning football team. We think that we have the roster to put together a real run and we're not going to be able to do it if you're acting like a moron. So don't do that. Otherwise, you're not going to play, bottom line. And I think that has to happen.
Like I said, I completely agree with you, and I think that when we look at this Bears defense and how dominant we've been all season, I think the most frustrating part is seeing the after effect of this game. I'm seeing all over Twitter now, Jaden Daniels is so good. He played such an unbelievable game, everything like this, right? Before that play, the Commanders had 12 points on offense. They scored 4 field goals. Now, look, I know our defense is elite, and there's no denying that. But it just sucks to see the narrative of before that play, the narrative was going to be Caleb Williams drove down the field and scored a touchdown in Washington. And he, should be the leader for Rookie of the Year. And now it's Jaden Daniels threw a Hail Mary against Caleb Williams to walk it off. And now Jaden Daniels is going to win the Rookie of the Year. And I talked about it on the FantasyBrainz podcast, but that game was very much, in my opinion, the battle for the Rookie of the Year. I think it's pretty clear that they are the two leaders and, especially being quarterbacks. And Daniels got the best of him on this play. And that is going to mean a lot when it comes down to voting at the end of the season.
Yeah, 100%. And, to be totally honest with you, I don't think Caleb was, I think that Jaden Daniels so far kind of had the Rookie of the Year title walking away, even up until this game. But now, it's not even close, which is unfortunate because, it's Jaden Daniels, like I said, he moved the ball well, but what did they do in the red zone? They had 12 points. You can't go out there bragging about your offense when you have 12 points to end the game. Like that's ridiculous. So I don't know. I still think I agree with you. Ultimately, regardless of where you came into this conversation at, but Jaden Daniels is leading it. And unless Caleb Williams puts some shit together, which maybe he will, these guys are rookies. We have a very small sample size of seeing them play in the NFL. And we like to form narratives a little bit early because we're blowhards that talk into microphones and even people on Twitter or whatever. But it's like at the end of the day, like we've seen them play only a handful of games. Anything can happen. We're only halfway through this season, and it's possible that Caleb Williams turns it around. If all he needs is a little bit more time, he could come out and be great. And it's not like he has played bad. It's just Jaden Daniels is far and away looks like an incredible player on a Washington team that doesn't have a ton of weapons and people were excited for, but didn't have high expectations for. It looks like they're winning games. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I appreciate you airing your grievances here for all the brainiacs, but now we are joined by Mr. Alan Casanova Castro from a sunny beach somewhere south of the border. So I'm going to hand it over to him and let him give his take on the last 2 games that we will discuss. We will be right back with you.
Yo. Welcome to sunny Dominican Republic. Can't be there recording live with the boys, so I'm here resort, enjoying myself. Had a chance to watch week 8 NFL games poolside, brag, and there's a lot to unpack. We had some fantastic games. We had Jaden Daniels with the Hail Mary to end the game. Terrific ball game. You feel for the Bears. MK, sorry, doesn't work out for you this week, but it was definitely a spectacular game. But my focus was really on two games. First one was really interested with the Cowboys and 49ers to see how these teams were going to respond. What are we actually going to get? And 49ers obviously came out and they dealt the work to the Cowboys. They got up early, and I think the thing that sticks out to me after watching that game is Dak Prescott just cannot handle pressure. If you look at the game flow, this is what happened to him a few years ago. He started out the beginning of that game basically just turning it over, not making smart plays, not able to sustain any drives, put Dallas in a hole, and then when they're seemingly out of it, he goes ahead and turns it on and starts dealing touchdowns, throwing them to CD, moving the ball, doing what they need to do as an offense, and looked pretty good. And then, lo and behold, as they are within striking distance again for the 49ers, Dak Prescott gets the ball and goes 0 for 4, and they can't do anything. And I think if you're a Cowboys fan at this point, I don't know if they want to admit it. I don't know if they are going to have a heart-to-heart look, have a long look in the mirror, but I think we know Dak isn't it. He's not going to win you the big game. He folds under pressure. He can't handle it. When the pressure's off, sure, he can put up the statistics, and I think that's what everybody will point to is how the statistics bear out where he's actually he's not doing too bad. If you look at the box score, he had a decent game. And I think that's the problem with modern NFL right now is you have so many people that don't actually watch the games or understand how this works as a team and the plays that need to be made overall and how the offense complements the defense and vice versa. But the NFL now, with fans just looking at the box score, you would say that's fine. And I think that's the problem with how we evaluate the talent. I think that's the problem with how we evaluate who's playing well, who's doing well, who had a good game. And then you have these fans that are just so gung-ho on, look how many touchdowns to interceptions and what are these ratios. Listen, it's about winning. I know we always talk about how winning is not a quarterback stat because it is a team game, but at the end of the day, the quarterback has to make the plays at the end to make it happen. We see it week over week, the quarterbacks that are able to make those plays and deliver, and the quarterbacks that are not able to make those plays and they don't deliver. And their box score and stat line may look pretty, but at the end, they just don't have it. And I think for Dak, he might have the box score that'll be sexy for everybody. But when you look at what he does to this team during the flow of a game, he absolutely hoses the defense. He puts them in terrible positions. He gives the other team way too many extra possessions. And if you're a team paying him that kind of money and looking to get to the playoffs and win some games and potentially make a Super Bowl, that's not going to do it. Absolutely not going to do it. The other quarterback coming out of yesterday that I think everybody is going to have to come to grips in terms with how he's played, and that's Aaron Rodgers. You know, the Jets made a big trade to get Davante Adams to the Jets, give them some additional weapons. They fire their head coach. They're thinking they can turn the corner. They're trying to fix all these things, but they're not actually fixing the thing that's actually plaguing this team. In the Jets, it's Aaron Rodgers. He's aging. He's old. Father Time is undefeated, and I think in this case it certainly looks that way. There's just no rhythm. It's all disjointed. The team just looks like a mess right now. It looks like a shell of itself, and I think if you're a Jets fan, you make all these moves. Last year we heard they're a quarterback away, and now you look at this season and they're right back where they were. They're in last. They don't have many answers for many of the things that are happening to them, and I think the experiment's over. I think that was what stood out to me on Sunday. There were some great performances, some great games, but I think that what stood out to me was that for a couple of these quarterbacks, like writing's on the wall, and Dak and with Aaron Rodgers. And the Jets, I just don't know where you go from here. You've paid a lot of money to a lot of different people. You're kind of hamstrung with what you can do with your roster. But I think the Bills or the Chiefs have the opportunity to do the funniest thing ever, and that would be to try to make a deal for Davante Adams. Jets are a sinking ship. If I'm one of those teams, maybe you try to juice up your roster even more. I know that the numbers won't bear that out, depending on how much money the Jets are willing to eat of Davante's contract to try to get some picks back, but they need to figure out how to rebuild. And I think it's a shocking reality, I think, for Jets fans to realize that this is it. But I think that's just where it is. I think that's it. That's the Bills' division still, and they're not any closer to winning that than they were years ago. So, a couple key points, a couple key things to think about. But it was a great Sunday, a lot of great games. I'll be happy to be back with you all next week. Appreciate it. Go Chiefs.
All right. So first of all, thank you, Alan, for taking time out of your busy day with lots of business meetings and, God knows what sort of dealings you're doing down there. He looked like he was enjoying himself, which is all you can ask, and he still got a chance to watch some football. So let's talk a little bit about the points that he raised. The first one being the Cowboys and Dak Prescott. I agree with him. My big takeaway watching this game was, I try to avoid watching the Cowboys because I don't hate myself. But I watched this entire game, and the first thing I thought, after the first few drives where this offense was moving the ball a little bit, it's like, people who didn't watch this game aren't going to realize how bad Dak Prescott is at football, because the 2 picks that he threw in this game were atrocious, and he had several other throws that were just not even close to being on target, and you can see it in his body language. He just doesn't feel comfortable. This offense looks discombobulated, and, especially as fantasy players, we're like, okay, Dak Prescott, he may not be that mobile, he might not be that good, but guess what? He's got CeeDee Lamb on his team, and he's going to put up points. And so a lot of people stop at that stat line, and when you actually watch him play, you're like, what did people see in Dak Prescott? And I know he was a different player before his injury a few years back, but watching him now, I'm just like, holy shit. Like, they just paid this guy? This guy looks terrible.
I agree and disagree with you both at the same time. I think that Dak has struggled a lot this year, and I think that he has not had the year that he was expected to have after getting that huge extension of $60 million a year. But it's not a similar situation, but like similar to Trevor Lawrence, it's very hard for me to put the blame of the Cowboys this season on Dak when the team and the roster is just so depleted. I mean, Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence and Deron Bland are all currently out on the defense. The offensive side of the ball, other than CeeDee Lamb, you don't have a single other relevant weapon. Their running back room is Dalvin Cook and Ezekiel Elliott right now, who both have not been good in multiple years. Jake Ferguson is a solid, little safety blanket that you have underneath. But again, like, he's kind of a product of the system, and their O-line isn't what it used to be. So I do blame Dak, and I think that, it starts with him and him playing better. But it's been very tough for him this season when if you figure out a way to take out CD on a third down play and you have a guy on the inside and have a guy on the outside and you can cover him up, I don't really trust anyone else in their offense to consistently get open. And I think that's what halts a lot of their drives at the end of the day. So I don't know if it's necessarily that I think Dak is the problem. Dak isn't the problem, but their roster this is such a poor constructed roster by Jerry Jones that I think he, in my opinion, is the first one to blame for this season.
Excuse me. Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I've made very similar arguments for Daniel Jones, and I know he's at a sort of a lower level than the quarterbacks we're talking about here, but there's only so much you can do as a quarterback. My perspective was completely from the eye test. Watching Dak Prescott, part of it too, and I know you just mentioned it, but only having this offense is CeeDee Lamb. This game illustrated that so well that maybe having Dalvin Cook there is going to change things over the course of time, but they just are so one-dimensional, and it's very difficult to play an NFL defense when they know, hey, they're going to try and get the ball to this one guy, and if they don't get the ball to him, we're going to win. So once that's kind of out in the open, you're hosed a little bit, and you're going to get some games where CeeDee Lamb catches 2 touchdown passes and goes for a ridiculous number of yards, and other games where he's locked down and the Cowboys look pathetic, and that's just the way it's going to be. Let's talk a little bit about the 49ers, though, because they're an interesting sort of case study right now. They're a good team. They have good coaching, but injuries have made their mark. And I guess my question to you is, can CMC come in and save the season and help them to make a playoff push? Or is it just going to be, they're going to be a good team, but they're not going to be able to get the wins that they need to get, giving up the games that they gave up at the beginning of the season, and it's just the way it is?
Well, I think especially with Ayuk out for the season, McCaffrey helps a shitload because he gives you now another playmaker out of the backfield. I'm a little interested to see how effective he is, because I don't think we can all say that he's going to come back and be the same player. I mean, we have no idea. He's been out for 10 weeks. Clearly, there's an injury there. Who knows if he's coming back to help save the season at a 85% or if he genuinely is back to around 100%. So that'll be something interesting. But I think the main thing that I've taken from this 49ers season is that Brock Purdy really is that guy. He has played tremendous football, in my opinion, and he has done his job, regardless of how good his receivers have played, regardless of how good the line has played. He has done his job, and they're sitting here at 4-4, which, for the 49ers is not great, but with their division not being very good right now and still very up for grabs, they are, in my opinion, the very clear best team in this division. I look back at 2 games on their schedule and say, how did you lose this game? And when I look at who lost this game for them, I look at the coaching, I look at the not necessarily injuries, but the mistakes that were made earlier in the game. And I just feel for Purdy in that regard because I watched him. I think it was the 49ers Cardinals game where Jake Moody gets injured on the opening kickoff. And now all of a sudden they can't kick field goals at all. And they have to go for it on 4th and 15 on the opponent's 25. And then I saw in the Rams game, I think it was Ronnie Bell, when all the other receivers were hurt, goes up and drops a 50-yard pass with the game on the line. And so when I look at those 2 plays, similar to how I see the Bears, they are so close to a different record that I think they are better than what people think. And I think that with their coaching and with their system and the lack of wins in their division, that this team is still going to win the division and probably end up as the 3 seed in the NFC this season.
Yeah, I like the optimism, and I share it because at the end of the day, even just with CMC, I would take an 80% CMC over like 90% of the running backs in football. So damn good deal. Although if he comes back and looks terrible, it's going to be a big indictment on the German medical field. I don't know what they did to him over there, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I agree. I think the 49ers are still contenders. That loss to the Cardinals might make it tough. If the Cardinals can keep putting wins together, it's going to make it tough. But the 49ers, I agree, are overall the best team in the division. I mean, there's just no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Aaron Rodgers, and then we're going to get to kickoff karaoke and get out of here. Aaron Rodgers, he might just suck. He might just be old. He might just be washed. I don't know. There's a meme. The meme that's been going around for this game is the Michael Scott meme of the Jets and the Patriots standing by each other, and they're both 2-win teams, but one of them had Super Bowl aspirations, and the other one has the lowest expectations that they've had in 25 years. And guess what? They're right next to each other, neck and neck. I don't know what the Jets do. They don't have a coach, so that makes it tough. They're the only team to ever in history not get the temporary coach bump. Normally when you bring in a coach after you fire your guy, you get at least 1 or 2 games where you're like, okay, like that guy was clearly the problem. No, that did not happen at all with this team. And the offense just looks bad despite the fact that they have a ton of weapons. The defense gave up a ton of yards despite the fact that they're incredible on paper. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe Aaron Rodgers is just a culture suck.
So are we saying that Aaron Rodgers could have been a product of the Packers system? Because that's kind of what I'm hearing. But
I think you might have had to make that argument before he turned 40, but yeah, maybe.
But on a more of a reality type of talk, I think that this team just has a lot of issues. Again, we've talked about it so many times this episode already, but just discipline. Like, they have stars on both sides of the ball. I mean, they have arguably the best receiver duo in the league. Wilson and Adams are both considered by many as top 10 receivers. You have a top 5 running back in Breece Hall. The O-line has actually been solid for them this year. And it's like, with all these facets working together with a great defense, how are they sitting here at 2-6? And I think I just got to chalk it up to they just aren't a very good team. And they're not very cohesive. They might have a lot of players on this team that are good, but those players aren't playing together and they're not making the plays at the right time. And when you can't do things at the right time, you're not going to be able to win football games. So I think with the Jets, like, I still won't throw in the towel on them and like fully say, yeah, Jets are done for the season and that I'm fully counting them out, because with Aaron Rodgers, I still, even if he's 40 years old, I still believe that he could do crazy things.
That's the PTSD as a Bears fan.
Of course. But I just think that this Jets team has a lot to look for in the future. And now it begs the question in the offseason, where do they go with their team? Because they're obviously going to be hiring a new head coach. So that, will be a huge change for them. But are they going to continue sticking with the Rodgers experiment and continuing to throw their seasons down the drain and doing whatever this guy wants? Because they brought in Lazard, they brought in Adams, they brought in Cobb. They bring in all these guys and they're still not winning games. So I think at some point, if the Jets want to keep themselves from being continuously embarrassed, I think they got to make a change next year, unless, Rodgers ends up winning all these next games.
Let's say they finish with 7 or 8 wins. You think he's done? I mean, it's kind of up to Rodgers ultimately. I mean, he could just decide that he's done at any time, but do they look to move on from him?
I think that they should. If they have 7 wins, I think they got to look to move on. There's just no reason why another year of Aaron Rodgers is going to be any different than this year, and why their team is going to be any different. Now, are they actually going to do that? Probably not, because if they end up with 8 wins, they're probably not going to be in a very good range to get a quarterback. But if I were them, I would get rid of Rodgers, because you're kind of stuck in a no man's land. Like, I just can't pick him to beat some of these other great quarterbacks that, are in their primes right now, as opposed to, about to hit the retirement home.
Which is wild. It's wild to think about, because you also have to consider the fact that when you're making a change like that, your entire team is going to be affected. You're not going to have the same team by the time you develop a different quarterback, 2 or 3 years down the line. And you're talking about basically a rebuild that it forces itself on you because Aaron Rodgers wasn't the answer. And that takes a lot of introspection to make that decision, to say, hey, I know on paper our team is great, but we're going to change everything over the course of the next 3 years to be relevant again, as opposed to saying, well, Aaron Rodgers, he's old, he'll figure it out, and like just go from there. I don't know. I was going to move it over to the Patriots, but I don't think we got to talk about the Patriots because they're rebuilding. And so it is what it is.
Yeah, I was going to say,
good for them,
go get Travis Hunter in the draft. Get yourself a stud.
Yeah, right.
There, look, Gerard Mayo looks decent. So good for the Patriots. Good win for them. It's a pride thing at the end of the day for them.
Yeah, and they did it with Jacoby Brissett. So that's crazy. All right, let's move on to Kickoff Karaoke. We'll breeze through this and get out of here. If you are new to the show, Kickoff Karaoke is a season-long competition between Alan, Slapdawg, and myself. We pick 4 games against the spread every week, and whoever at the end of the season ends up with the most games picked wrong, so the fewest points, has to sing the national anthem live before the Super Bowl on this podcast, which that's got to be terrible for our listener base. I mean, we're gonna lose a lot of downloads that day because nobody wants to hear that. We're gonna be terrible, but it'll be embarrassing and it'll be funny. So far, your boy Scott Del Rey is in the lead with 21 points. Allen in second with 17, and Slaps trailing with only 12. So that's been rough for Slaps. Let's start things off here. And Kahan, you're going to be kind of the guest picker. Tell us if we're idiots or not. We're going to start off with the Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are 6.5-point favorites. This is an interesting one because the line makes it kind of juicy. Like, okay, Tua's back. I know they didn't look great, but we could see him putting up some points. Josh Allen hasn't thrown a ton of interceptions, but we know he's capable of throwing a lot of interceptions. So the 6.5-point line is like, okay, that makes it interesting. Are you going to go with the Bills minus 6.5, or are you going to take the upset with the Dolphins?
I'm going to keep it simple. Bills get it done at home with the points. It's just a home game for them. I don't think that the Dolphins can go into Buffalo and win this game. It's not going to be cold as Buffalo gets in the winter, but it's definitely not going to be, Miami sunshine out there. The Bills are a better team. Josh Allen's playing great football, and the Bills usually have the Dolphins number if you look at the history of these two teams.
Yeah, we'll make this one real easy because all of us are taking the Bills. I'm Scotty. Hey, Slapdawg and Alan also took the Bills. And at the end of the day, it's just because they're the better team. We haven't seen it yet from the Dolphins, and maybe they'll put it together, but we haven't seen it yet. There's no reason to believe we will just yet. And Josh Allen's playing MVP football. And as long as Josh Allen's doing that, they can beat anybody in the league. Let's move on to the Chargers at the Browns. This is an interesting one. The Chargers are 2.5-point favorites here. Browns have Jameis Winston. They look a little bit revitalized. What are your thoughts?
I'm actually going to take the Chargers here on the road. They're going to cover. They're going to win by 3 or more. They're just a very well-coached team, which is obviously not surprising when Jim Harbaugh is your coach. I don't see a way that the Browns can consistently score against them, and I think that the Chargers are eventually just going to run them down. Browns are coming off a very good win against the Ravens, and I think that a lot of their great plays might not be as lucky this week. Not to say that they were lucky, but I think that, you're not going to beat Harbaugh twice in a row. You can't beat both Harbaughs.
Yeah, that may be impossible. I don't know if anyone's done that. But so I guess Slapdawg and Alan and I are also on the same page here, probably for different reasons. I'm going to take the Browns just out of pure spite because I hate the Chargers. I genuinely think, putting my bias aside, it's not going to sound like it, but I genuinely think the Chargers and the Broncos are 2 of the most overrated teams in football right now. And it's because the standards are so low, right? People aren't expecting the world from them, and they're saying, hey, they're putting some stuff together. This looks good. This looks better. They're both shitty teams. They're bad teams. No matter what the record says, they don't have the weapons. Jim Harbaugh is not God. He can't come in here and turn this organization around in one season. Maybe he will down the line. It's not this year. And then on top of that, I'm just rooting for Jameis, man. I just want Jameis to come in and prove to the Browns front office, like, you guys are morons. We should have done this so long ago. Look what I can do. And I'm hoping that happens. So I agree. I think this is probably going to be a tight one. Could go either way, but I'm going to go with the Browns just for my own ego. Next up, we have Cowboys at Falcons. The Falcons are 2.5-point favorites here, obviously, kind of riding high. Cowboys, the complete polar opposite. What are your thoughts here?
I was very tempted to take Dallas here just because, again, with Dallas, it felt like in past years, they can win any game, they can lose any game, and this just seems like a game that they could win. But their roster is just so depleted. I can't see them going into Atlanta and being able to stop the Falcons passing attack. I think Drake London will have a really good game. Darnell Mooney could have a great game. And I think it'll be a shootout. I think the Falcons could win around like a 31-21 game where it's a pretty high scoring game, but I think the Falcons are the play here.
Yeah, we all agree with you. The entire LeatherBrainz team is on the same page on this one as well. Falcons I've been riding high on. I'm not giving up yet. Kyle Pitts, no matter what, he's going to be great. With that said, the Cowboys have shown year over year that they can compete. And if they play well, they can put a game together. So I don't blame you for being tempted to take the Cowboys, but if I'm going to root for anybody's downfall, it's going to be Dallas. So I'm doing that. Last game here. This one hits home with you and with Slapdawg. The Bears at the Cardinals. Cardinals are -1. They are favored. What are your thoughts?
Gonna go with the hometown Bears, baby. I mean, like I said, I think we're one of the more talented teams in the league. I think that after a really bad loss like that, I think that the team is going to hopefully come together and they're going to win this game in Arizona. I'm not too impressed by what I've seen from the Cardinals so far. I think we'll be able to defend them. And I think it helps being able to come off a game where we just played a very mobile quarterback and seeing that we were able to stop Daniels and putting a lot of what we did against him against the Cardinals, who have a very similar offense in terms of, you know, how they scheme and how their personnel lines up. Obviously, Cliff Kingsbury was there beforehand. So I think I like that, and I like our offense to do a lot better than they did last week. I mean, it can't really get any worse. So give me the Bears plus the point.
Yeah, I agree. I thought about this one for a long time, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But I think I agree ultimately because I don't think the Cardinals offense has proven consistently enough that they're going to be able to move the ball against the Bears defense. The Bears defense is phenomenal, and the Cardinals are really going to struggle with that, I think. And when the Cardinals struggle on offense, everyone basically takes a deep breath and says, hey, this isn't our week. And we've seen it time and time again with the Cardinals this season. And not to mention the Bears coming off a tough loss, Cardinals coming off a good win. Like, I just think that it's going to be, the Bears have a chip on their shoulder. They have something to prove. Caleb Williams is going to want to prove that, hey, maybe I should be in this Rookie of the Year conversation. I agree with you. Allen is also taking the Bears, but Slapdawg is sticking with his hometown Cardinals, and he is just praying that they pull it out. We'll see how it goes. That is the only one that we differed on from between the three of us. So this is an interesting week where only 1 point hangs in the balance, which is good for me, I guess.
It'll be interesting. And I think that, you know, one thing to keep in mind out there, Caleb Williams is good in warm weather. So let's see how he does in Arizona.
I like it. All right, man. Well, I appreciate you spending some time with me today. I know this was a longer episode. Your stamina is unquestionable. It's crazy how good you are at this. So thank you for joining me. All you brainiacs out there, of course, do all the things that we ask you to do every week, like subscribe, go follow us on X. That's where our largest basin. We've almost got 40,000-ish brainiacs joining us over there. So go join that crowd and hang out with us. And then, of course, visit LeatherBrainz.com. We have some phenomenal writers that are putting out new content literally every single day on our website, talking about all sorts of things. We got a couple guys who write for certain teams. We got a couple guys who talk about gambling, if you're a DGen like that. And then we have some other guys who just write about the NFL and, have some articles that mirror in a lot of ways the conversations that we have on the podcast. And then last thing, make sure you check out the FantasyBrainz Podcast. We have Mr. Kahan here, who does a great job over there with Charlie, and they give you all the information that you need to win in fantasy football, which is very, very annoying when you lose, as I know from personal experience. So make sure you go check them out. Kahan, thank you very much, and we
are
out.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you tune into our new releases every week on your favorite podcast app. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out LeatherBrainz.com for all of your fantasy football needs. And remember, Brainiacs, a championship should be more than a fantasy.